Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Innovation Coffee Break. I'm Bob Birch from NDSU Ag Communication and the NDSU Extension Innovation Team, and my co-host today is Stacy Wang from the NDSU Extension Innovation Team. Hey, Stacy.
Howdy. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for joining us. Our topic today is to talk a little bit about programming planning. Specifically, we wanted to have a conversation around the lean knowledge worker process, and we shared a graphic about that in the invite to this meeting. It's also been attached. I assume that's Stacy. Thanks, Stacy, for attaching it to the content of this Skype meeting. If you need to access that, down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Share Content button. Go ahead and click that, and then click Manage Content, and you'll see that there as well. I've added that graphic to Google Drive, and I've got a link to it as well if you want to view it there or download it, and I just posted that to the chat, so feel free to check that out there. So as always with the coffee break, this is intended to be a free-flowing discussion. We want to hear from you guys and utilize our collective intelligence around this topic. So I think, Stacy, we've got a couple questions to get folks started and just kind of get the conversation going. And I think you had said that you were curious about wanting to know the answer to our first question. So do you want to go ahead with that one? Do you have it handy?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm prepared. So I wanted to know, and I think I like to start off on a positive foot, what parts of program planning are going well for you? So let's start off with the positives.
Are we talking individually or as a program team?
I think it could be either. What's going well for you individually?
Is anything about program planning going well for anyone?
I do have something. It's not an individual, but I think as a livestock team, over the past year, we really improved our communication within the team, and so that's helped just us as specialists get a better sense of what's needed out in the counties and where we can have a program that people will actually utilize.
How about some other areas?
As a county agent, having the pairs program planning, the plans of action, I guess, in the pairs system from the specialists, that's super helpful in the planning process and in the reporting too.
Cindy, on like the food nutrition side, do you think, or the FCW side, do you think that there is enough communication between specialists and agents? Or is that something that could be improved?
I've not thought about that. Some specialists communicate a lot. There's frequent messages coming out. Some communicate less often than that. Seems like it's adequate for what's needed.
Okay. I just was curious for my own knowledge since that's my area. Want to make sure we're doing good.
That's a good question, though, because sometimes I don't know if I'm communicating enough. Like, I think I send out updates or questions when necessary, but maybe I'm not. That's always good feedback, Cindy. So if you've ever got thoughts like, oh, it would be nice to hear this type of information, let me know.
Well, plus there's always, the the calls, the Skype or the Zoom calls that happen in between too. So those are good touch points, I think, to keep everybody kind of rolling along and informed and in the loop.
Thanks, Cindy and Miranda and Nikki for sharing. Just to catch people up, if you jumped on, we're talking about program planning, but you don't have to necessarily think about that as directly extension program planning. I think the model that we're talking about, which is the lean knowledge worker process, really applies to a lot of different kinds of planning, and I've found it useful, even though I don't technically do external facing extension programming. I've found it useful for my own planning. So you can find that if you don't have it. I posted it to the chat, and I don't know, in Zoom sometimes the chat does not stay consistent, like you don't see what was posted before you joined. So Sandy or Kelly or somebody who was on before or who joined after I posted that, do you see that link to the Google Drive up in the conversation in the chat?
Yep, I'm seeing the Google link.
Okay. If you don't see that, let me know and I can post it again. It's also in the content. So down at the bottom of your Skype, there's a share content button, and then you click manage content, and you can see the attachment that Stacy put up of the image.
I don't think I did that.
Somebody did it. Was it Sonia?
It might have been somebody did it. I cannot take credit for it.
Oh, I keep giving you credit though. If someone gives you credit, Stacy, take it.
Well, but if the other person that actually did it is on this call, I would feel bad.
Maybe it was automatic because I attached it to the invite. That would be cool. We might need to test that in the future. Awesome. Thanks, Microsoft. So we'll be talking about this lean knowledge worker process and how that might affect program planning or your other kinds of planning that you're doing. But since I let Stacy start off with the positive, I'll be the negative. I know that's surprising to you guys for me to do the negative. But what's not going so well in program planning? What could be improved?
I think evaluation is always a constant challenge in getting the information that we need to show our impact. And I know we just had a team leader call last week, and this is on the A&R side, and this is something we always come back to, is how can we do a better job of evaluation and showing our impacts and not burn people out.
I would agree with that. I think that's a challenge in whatever area every single area out there. So, anyone else?
Everybody's planning's going swimmingly, or we're just having trouble thinking of specific ways to phrase it?
I think where my trouble is right now is I've got a specific project I'm working on, and I had a full team in place, and now people are moving around, and so the full team is sort of up in the air. There's a couple spots that are just, I have to wait till there's funding before I can do hiring or offer certain things, and it's frustrating and a little bit unnerving because I can't fully plan until I have those people in place. So help me with that, people.
We're a lively bunch today.
Very quiet. Is it the rain that
It might
is
be.
sucking the energy out of people? Well, do you want to talk about this process? Maybe if we had something to react to we would have more reactions. Because our questions aren't doing it, I don't think. I posted the link to it on Google Drive again because I think Maria just jumped on. So we're talking about this lean knowledge worker process. The graphic is actually from Paul Hill, who, actually a graphic artist that was working for Paul Hill, who put it into the book. We've tried that before, 500 Years of Extension Wisdom. And in NDSU Extension Innovation Team meeting, we talked about having a conversation about this because I did some reading groups around that book, and it seemed to be an area of interest to people who were in the reading group. So we thought it might be of interest to a wider audience as well. So is everybody able to access that either through the attachment to the meeting or from the link that I provided? What things strike you about it that might be different than how you've done planning or how we typically do planning? Or
I think when I look at it, and what strikes me is I don't necessarily consider all of these as part of like the whole process. Like I might start with all of like vision through impact, but then the rest of it's kind of, oh, that is part of the process too. But I don't think about that.
I would agree with that. I was wondering how many people actually go through this whole process for extension specifically. Because I know for research I do a lot of these things, but I don't necessarily do it for extension.
Another thought is sometimes I feel like it starts at the funding piece. Like, hey, here's this opportunity, and then that's kind of the kickoff before the vision even is there, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing, but I believe that it happens.
Yeah, I would agree with that your funding kind of drives the vision versus the vision maybe driving the funding sources.
so what's interesting about this process is, and Paul adapted this from sort of the innovation research and made it and extensionized it a little bit, thus the present and publish kind of thing, which wouldn't happen like in a corporation, obviously. But what is different about it is this idea of innovation and quick failure, right? So like Nikki's saying, if we start with the funding piece, like we're already on the hook for a successful program, right? So we don't get to try new things necessarily because we need to do proven things that are going to actually get the results that the funder expects. So it can really be a stifling way to, it can really stifle innovation to kind of start at that funding part. And really, even if we take funding off of it, I guess I would make the argument based on like the logic model that we are usually starting with impact as the start. Like what are the long-term, medium-term outcomes in the logic model? And so again, we're kind of starting at a place, at least in this model, where we don't get to fail fast. And that's sort of a big term in innovation is to fail fast, fail small and fail fast, not do big, spectacular failures that take a lot of resources. So that's one of the big differences that I see in this model.
So this probably isn't totally connected, but it is front and center for me right now. I failed fast this morning. Everybody should be cheering for me. Sent out the message about conference. Had the wrong phone number in there. failed fast within 4 minutes. I had a message back that the phone number didn't work, so I tried to also fix it fast. So I appreciate everybody's understanding and leniency. I don't know. I think I probably still have humble pie and egg all over my face, but oh well.
You don't have egg on your face at all, Cindy. Like everybody on here, I think, has made at least one of those, right? I hope so. Maybe some of the short timers have not done it here anyway.
I actually kind of like getting those sometimes, Cindy. It reminds me that everybody is human, and you can easily overlook a random letter or have the wrong phone number listed in an email. It's totally okay.
Yep. Well, thank you. I appreciate your forgiveness, and I really appreciate Trish coming forward. And just that we have such great colleagues to work with, and they catch us when we fall, and they help us pick up again and fix things and move forward. So that's part of what makes this organization so wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really relevant example, Cindy, because I think it illustrates like how this model could be useful. Because if we start at funding or we start at impact, it's really hard to get people's input, I think, and to feel like you have people there that are on a team because you're making something so big and complex. And I have been on calls where specialists are asking for feedback on a particular program, and agents are sort of like, well, I don't know, because it's such a big undertaking and it's hard to kind of get a view of it. But if you're doing things in a small way and testing them, it's an opportunity for your colleagues to kind of pick you up and correct you. Not correct you is probably the bad word, but give input and say, hey, wait, this doesn't seem to be working quite
it's
right.
Okay. You can say correct me. That's PC. You don't have to be PC. That's fine. It was a correction. Call it what it is, Bob. That's fine.
It was in your case. I just am saying, like, in the program, please. It wouldn't necessarily be a correction. It would just be like, hey, here's my input, or here is something we might do something a little bit differently. It's hard to get that kind of input if we're like starting at funding. It's like, well, but this is what the funder wants, is this, so maybe we can't take as much input as we could.
This is Hannah jumping in. I know one thing that I always appreciate, especially with feedback, is like finding the right person to bounce ideas off of. And just somebody that can be like, okay, I like this, but we're kind of all over the board, so like let's focus in on this one aspect, and kind of maybe like a small details person. I think it's important because I think some of us are like big detail orientated and small detail orientated, and at least for me, I know depending on the situation, I can be one or the other, but I can't be both at the same time.
I would agree. Those people play an important role.
And I think it's a balance too, because you don't want somebody who's like super discouraging. It's like a balance of still encouraging their ideas and seeing where they have to go, but maybe just having them unpack the idea more.
Yeah, thoughtful questions to kind of expand on things.
I agree. Encouragement is good, but rubber stamping is, that's not effective. I've been working with the people that are working on a 4-H innovation, a grant that they got from that, and the things that we're putting together, pieces for that. And that has been a huge collaboration with a lot of discussion and input and tweaking and, working simultaneously on Google Docs. And it's been a real adventure. I think we're going to end up with a good product because of it, but a lot has gone into it. So got our fingers crossed.
You get out what you put in.
any other thoughts that you want to share about this? Like, is there anything that's striking you about it? Is there anything that's like, this, why are we talking about this? We have a process, or I have a process. And if you do have a process, like, do you have a model or a framework for, like, this is how what I follow to plan things?
Okay, so I'm going to bounce off of Hannah's comment about the big picture versus the little details. So yesterday I was visiting with a colleague, and she was kind of talking about, the big picture in terms of planning with a calendar, not with a program, but with a calendar. And basically what it boiled down to is things we've heard before, but she was going to put the big rocks in first. And that included services, education pieces that she was going to schedule, and time block for delivery. But it also included what she was going to time block for personal time. So, because the experience has been that, things just multiply, or they bleed over, or they, if somebody calls and asks for something and you look at your calendar and you figure, well, I don't have anything there right now, or I can move something around to make it work, or I can squeeze it in, that's just such a temptation. And so she was really, asking me, I think, to help be her accountability partner for putting in the big rocks and sticking to that all the way across.
Hey, Cindy, can you tell, for folks who haven't done 7 Habits, like, what's big rocks, small rocks?
Oh, okay. The big rocks are the really important priorities, things that really matter. And sometimes when we're production oriented and task driven, those big rocks look like, the work we do. But also from 7 Habits, if you talk about the time matrix, when you're talking about things that are important and things that are urgent, and how that becomes a matrix, you can have any one of 4 combinations there. Sometimes those things that are not urgent, because they're not urgent, we might think they're not important. So that's like exercise time, for example, or a day off, or just yourself, or a family thing. But so many times, we don't, we so want to do well and serve well that gets lost sometimes. And then by the same token, the flip side of that is that just because something's urgent, some of us think that must be really important. That's what I've got to do, So it's really just kind of take a step back a little bit and assess, is this important or not important? And is it urgent or not urgent? And then deal with it appropriately or accordingly.
Thank you. Yeah, and if I remember about that right, if you have a finite kind of amount of space, like you do with time, like you have a container, if you put the big rocks in first, the little rocks can go around the big rocks. But if you fill it with little rocks, you can't get any big rocks in, right? So however you figure out the matrix is kind of how you're figuring out what's your little rocks and what's your big rocks. But anyway, sorry, I just want to make sure, because not everybody has had
that was a great description, and it is a beautiful analogy, and I've actually seen it demonstrated with a bucket and rocks of all various sizes, and it's amazing how it works. It's true.
Awesome.
I think that's really important, Cindy, though, that they recognized the personal big rocks, because sometimes we completely forget that as we're doing our planning for the year. And even thinking as a specialist too, as I've got, like, what's a big rock for me might be a smaller rock for somebody else, but in order to make it one of those non-urgent items, I need to do some additional planning so that when I'm presenting the information, people don't feel rushed and have to try to sneak it in somewhere. They have enough time to plan ahead as well.
Any other thoughts about this process, about program planning, or if there are things that you want to bring up outside of that? I see Nikki shared a tip in the chat, so check that out. Thanks, Nikki.
That was all Maria. That was so cool. I didn't know you could do that.
So for folks who might be listening to the recording, it's about recalling a message in Outlook, and I'll make sure to put that link in the show, in the blog post where we post the recording. Sorry, Maria, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
This is Laura Knox calling, from Grand Forks. I've been halfway listening in and to another meeting as well. But I would say that sometimes I think it's important that we remember to go back and forth between execute and evaluate, kind of evaluating along the way as we're executing, because if we're going to respond to our learners, especially in parent education, we can't just execute as planned without stopping at each point and evaluating how they're receiving the information. Are we really meeting their needs? Do we need to make changes along the way before the whole program is over, or we lose them and they don't come back? So
That's a great point.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think that's super important. And, sometimes we refer to that as summative evaluation, is the kind that we tend to do in extension, which sort of at the end, right? We get a big program and we want to kind of summarize the whole thing. What was the impact of the whole program? And formative is what it's talking about, the lean knowledge worker process, and what Laura's talking about is that you evaluate and then you iterate, right? So you try something else, you make a change. It's like, oh, wait, this wasn't quite working right. Let's tweak this, and then you go back and try it again. And that's, in education, we call that formative evaluation. As you're going along, you're forming your program.
Laura, are you doing that, at the moment of the group, your parent group is there in front of you and you're perking along and you're 8 or 10 minutes into it and you can see glazed looks, or you can see like confused looks or whatever, and so you check for understanding, and at that point, if they're not like engaged and it's not meeting their needs or whatever the case may be, you like totally skip the rest of what you thought you were going to do and just shoot from the hip, or what?
So much of our curriculum that we use with parents are kind of packaged programs, and we like to do them with as much fidelity as possible, but you also have to balance that with being responsive to your parents too. And sometimes on that particular evening, the most pressing thing in their lives isn't necessarily talking about limit setting. It's about the tantrums that happened the night before, or responding to their kids, in positive ways. You always have to be willing to have a little bit of wiggle room in what you discuss on any night, or somehow be able to slant the subject matter so that it applies to them and their real lives, rather than trying to fit in their issues and their things that are relevant to them into the program. And so I would say that in our programming, we really have to have a sense of getting to know our learners and our attendees and what ages their children are and what their issues are, and spending a lot of time discussing with them, and leaving time for that really helps. So yes and no is my answer, I guess.
I think what you're describing, Cindy, I think I do a pretty good job at, which is like maybe too good a job at, because I might just blow up a whole workshop just because somebody asked a question that interested me. But what I don't do a very good job at is like, okay, that workshop's done, maybe we do a little evaluation, even if that's self-reflection, even if it's I didn't do smile sheets, or I didn't, get actual data, even if it's self-reflection, taking that and having it inform the next time I do that workshop. That's what I think more of like formative is not. I could see how you could think of that as adjusting in the moment, and that I think it is adjusting in the moment too. But what I suck at is not like actually thinking about that workshop after I get it done and making a change in the next one to make it better.
Well, Bob, I've been at enough of your workshops that I know you are an expert at adjusting and adapting, being receptive to the people's needs. And I appreciate that about you very much.
Thank you. That's what these coffee breaks are about, is for me to fish for compliments, by the way. And I finally got one. Thanks, Cindy.
So we can be done.
We can be done. Yeah, done. There you go.
One of the things I've done that's worked well is at the beginning of a class or of a series of classes, I will take the kind of the main points of the curriculum and list those and tell participants, this is what the curriculum covers, what are you most interested in focusing on, and maybe have a few blank spaces for them to add in other topics that they might want to talk about, just so that from the very beginning I feel like I'm addressing things that are most important to the group. So it's kind of a way of formative assessment, a pre-test in a way.
I think in this day and age, we have to remember that, or we have to assume that the people are coming to our classes with at least some knowledge of the topic. So they're not coming just totally no knowledge whatsoever. And so finding out where their starting point is and then adjusting our programming from there, which is hard with a package program, but kind of, especially for seasoned people, knowing where they can pick up from and take off. So
I don't get in on many of these innovation calls, and I'm so glad I'm here today, but maybe the rest of you aren't. I don't know. So, but Stacy, that's such a cool way to say that. And I've actually started doing that with the groups that I meet with, and it's right up front in the open. And so I typically will give them or acknowledge, that they are adults and they have information and they have experiences, and that what's going to be discussed today, may not or will probably not be all new stuff, but if they can get pieces along the way that they add to what they know and then contribute what they already had so that everybody gets the benefit. And so I always call that the pineapple approach to learning. And I always hope that they can pick up a slice or a chunk or even just a tidbit. And so that's how I kind of launch and we go forward, and people seem to appreciate it. It breaks the ice and sets the stage for pretty good interaction and contributions.
cool.
That is awesome, Cindy. I love that. And I'm going to steal it, definitely. Because I think it's important to name these things. I think sometimes we talk about like that, what Stacy brought up, and we're like, okay, we acknowledge that. But if you don't name it in the room, it's only benefiting you, right? And you found a way to do it where it benefits everybody and encourages them to learn from each other and contribute to the conversation. That's awesome. Thank you.
It is a really important concept when dealing with adults and adult learners. It's very offensive to adults who have a lot of background knowledge or feel like they have something to share about the topic if you don't acknowledge that they also have, So I know the worst thing that we can do with parents is to come in and try to act like we're trying to tell them how to raise their children or what's going to work in their household. And we just come in as presenting information and talking about children and hoping that we all learn from one another. And it sets up a nicer environment.
Thanks, Laura. Other thoughts or things you want to bring up, talk about while we have each other's attention? okay? Is that enough space? Is anybody thinking of bringing something up, or no? Okay. All right. Thanks. Awesome conversation. Appreciate your time on a summer day, even though it's a rainy one for most of us, I think. Reminders that we recorded this and we'll post it with as many resources as Stacy can help me remember on the NDSU Extension Innovation webpage. That's www.ag.ndsu.edu/innovation. Reminder that if you haven't already, please join the NDSU Extension Innovation group on Facebook if you're a Facebook user, and please contribute and share. Like, that's an open group. It's not a space where we are expecting you to be silent and wait for innovation team to post. Like, post and share and comment and continue these conversations in between the coffee breaks. Our coffee breaks are the third Thursday of the month, and I don't have a calendar open, but you can count and figure out what the third Thursday of July is at 3 p.m. Central Time. That'll be the next innovation coffee break, and of course we'll send out an invite and a reminder. Anything I'm missing, Stacy?
Nope.
Thanks again, everybody. Have an awesome rest of the week and weekend, and we'll see you next month.